Yogah Karmasu Kaushalam.
Hi, welcome to the 9th session in the course HRM for non-HR managers. In the previous session, we discussed employee selection, which follows recruitment. You would have noted that as part of the discussion on assessment centers, we mentioned interviews as one of the tools of selection. In this session, we are going to discuss candidate interviews in depth because they are the most widely used tool of selection. By the end of this session, you would have gained an overview of various types of interviews, noted some of the errors which bring down the effectiveness of interviews as a procedure, and reviewed the guidelines on how to be a more effective interviewer. In general terms, interview is a face-to-face exchange of information between two persons. This exchange is goal-oriented and is generally led by one person who asks the questions. Dessler defines candidate interviews as a procedure designed to obtain information from a person through oral responses to oral inquiries. For the employers or managers, candidate interviews are one among the interviews conducted for several purposes. Such interviews, as you may remember, may be conducted for collecting information as part of job analysis. As we will discuss in future, interviews may also be conducted as part of performance appraisal. Michael McDaniel and colleagues define a candidate interview as a procedure designed to predict future job performance based on applicants' oral responses to oral inquiries. Armstrong takes a little further position by adding that interviews aim at supplementing the data from application form and resume with detailed or specific information about competencies, attitudes, experience, and personal characteristics of the candidate and open up an opportunity to judge whether the individual will fit the organization and how they would get along with others. In short, according to Armstrong, selection interviews can provide answers to these questions. Can individuals do the job? In other words, are they competent? Will the individuals do the job? In other words, are they motivated? And finally, how will the individuals fit into the organization? Candidate interviews for selection can be of different types depending on their structure, content, administration, and line of questioning, as you can see on your screen. The details such as advantages and limitations of each and when each is most suitable can be found in our online content area. We will describe each of these interview types next. When we classify interviews based on how much standardized or structured they are, we have three variants: structured or directive interviews, unstructured or non-directive interviews, and semi-structured interviews. In case of a structured interview, the interviewer conducts the procedure with a list of pre-decided questions. The directives often also include desired answers or elements of the answers and the guidelines on how to score or rate the answers. The unstructured interview, on the other hand, is an opposite of that. There is no set format for the interviewer, who may or may not have a list of tentative questions or directions. There is seldom a formal guide for scoring the candidate based on their answers. The line of questioning is often spontaneous or even reactive, where the next question draws from the answer to the previous question. In some cases, the interviewers may start with a tentative list of questions from which they may ask a few. They may also have some idea of rating criteria that help decide relative grading of different candidates. In case if you are wondering which one should be used, then we would recommend structured interviews. Structured interviews ensure that all candidates are asked a standard set of questions, making the interview results more reliable and valid. Structured interviews help relatively less talented interviewer conduct better interviews. Important questions are not missed because of the structure, and there is a control over overall subjectivity in rating the candidates. In terms of the contents of the interview, they can be classified in 4 ways. Contents imply the kind of questions asked by the interviewer. Situational or case-based questions first present the candidate with a description of a situation or a case, which may be real life or imaginary. After reading the description, the candidate answers the questions raised by the interviewer. The questions are based on description. Usually, the questions in the situational or case-based interviews aim at eliciting the candidate's response in terms of decision, judgment, and behavior in the given situation. Multiple skills may be expected to back the candidate's decision and analysis. Behavior-based questions ask candidates to describe how they would have dealt with particular actual experience. Interviewers are interested in knowing how the candidates behaved in response to a real-life problem and what outcomes it led to. The line of questioning focuses on uncovering competencies underlying the candidate's behavior. Usually, this type of interview would require guideline to the interviewer on behaviors associated with the criteria of interest. Armstrong cites questions such as, "Can you tell me about any occasions when you have persuaded your fellow team members to do something which at first they didn't really want to do?" Without full structuring, it is unlikely that behavior-based interviews can be effective. These also require high level of competence of the interviewers. Other questions mainly include capability, biographical, and psychometric type. These questions enable the interviewer to develop a better judgment about the candidate's personality, styles, and predispositions compared to the information provided by the biodata and tests, because the interviewer can ask a series of questions to probe deeper into something about the candidate. Remember, the aim of the interview is to judge whether the candidate can and will do the job, and if so, how they will do it. At the time of asking these questions, the interviewers generally have before them the biodata and test scores. The interviewer needs to be adequately skilled in interviewing so as to ask appropriate questions that help form reliable judgment while respecting the candidate's privacy. The work demonstration interviews combine the work sample, which we discussed in our previous session, as one of the tools of selection. In some organizations, shortlisted candidates are called for interviews and asked to bring their portfolios that showcase the work done by them. The work samples could be for actual clients as well as the artisan or professional's originals. In some occasions, material may be kept in the interview room and the candidate is asked to make a sample out of it, demonstrating their knowledge, skills, and ability. Part of the interview is based on the questions asked about the work samples. The third category of interviews is based on the manner in which the interview is administered. Access to technology, the level of organization at which the candidates are to be selected, and the number of applicants for the job openings help decide how the interviews would be administered. In many organizations, candidates do not appear in person for the interview. Instead, a video conferencing software or other popular free services such as Skype are used. One-on-one interviews take place between one interviewer and one job candidate. These occur at almost all levels in the organization, and usually they are the last tool to be used for candidate selection. Panel interviews still involve one candidate at a time, but the questions are asked by a panel of experts. Usually a panel is formed where the job involves multiple dimensions of knowledge, skills, ability, and others. Depending on what dimensions will help form judgment about whether the candidate can and will perform the job and how they will do so, the number and specialization of the panelists is decided. Most often, There are subject matter or technical experts, psychologists and behavioral experts, and senior members from the organization representing the appropriate functional departments. Experts may be from within the organization or outside. In some cases, the government may appoint a panelist who would be responsible to ensure that the selection occurs in a manner which is fair, transparent, and as prescribed by the law. Career or job fair interviews are a type of mass interviews where there is a large number of job seekers as well as the representatives of the organizations with job openings. We have discussed such fairs as a source of recruitment in the previous sessions. Interviews that take place at a career or job fair may be of preliminary nature and may be used more to screen out the candidates that do not seem to present a possibly good fit between their KSA and the job. Walk-in interviews are also a tool that is used where the expected pool of candidates is large and where prior screening is not required due to low level of KSA involved. You know that KSA means knowledge, skills and abilities. These interviews may be used for final selection or initial screening depending on the case. The fourth and last category of interviews is based on the method of questioning. As in case of the first category, an interview may use a combination of these depending on what answers will help the interviewers reach a better prediction of whether the candidate can and will do the job and how they will do it. Open questions invite the candidates to describe or narrate at length what may reveal their KSA to the interviewer. Closed-ended questions, in contrast, leave only the option of saying yes or no in reply. While the closed-ended questions help verify the information that the interviewers already have or the inferences they have already made about the candidate, the open-ended questions help generate the content on which to base opinion or form conclusion, develop a perspective, or reach the depth of information and form judgment about the complex matters such as motivation and commitment of the candidate. Probing questions represent a series of questions that follow a single issue or topic. Starting with initial question, each successive question invites the candidate to reveal more about the topic of questioning. They also help build continuity, which is necessary for a nuanced understanding of what the candidate may have to offer. Psychological comfort of the candidate is an important element of interviewing. Because the consequences of the interview are important for the candidate, they are likely to be under stress and even performance anxiety. If the quality of the information provided by them in such a state of mind is not considered suitable for the interviewers to form a prediction about the candidate's future job performance, they may make an attempt to put the candidate at ease. However, sometimes the interviewers believe it will be appropriate to create rather than reduce the stress. First of all, the job itself may have to be performed under high stress levels. If the job involves important decisions and decisive behavior under stressful situations, then also the interviewers may prefer to use negative line of questioning, put the candidate under stress, and see how they respond. Stress interview must be conducted carefully and ethically. Several experts believe that stress interviews are counterproductive and should not be used. Since this course is meant for non-HR managers, we would now discuss the preparation for interviews next. We have mentioned several times that effective interviewing requires skills. We briefly present the skills that help conduct interviews effectively. Effective interviews are those which help the interviewers predict with reasonable reliability the candidate's performance at the job. Armstrong includes establishing rapport, listening, maintaining continuity, keeping control, and note-taking as essential skills of an interviewer. Establishing rapport involves putting the candidates at ease, encouraging them to respond and creating a conducive environment for the interview to unfold. You should note that it is not about being nice. Rapport helps the candidates share freely about themselves and their work, which helps the interviewers form the prediction they are interested in forming. Rapport building takes more than asking, "So tell me something about yourself." It is also about not being aggressive or critical. Negativity puts the candidates on the defensive and blocks their normal patterns of behavior. Listening skills make the interview a conversation with a purpose by helping the interviewer absorb, understand, analyze, and make sense of the information coming their way. Effective listening helps summarize and paraphrase what the candidate has said already and confirm whether it was understood correctly. Some candidates report that their interviewers seemed interested more in speaking than listening. Nothing might dissipate the effectiveness of the interview more than that. It should be remembered that an interview aims at gathering information that helps predict the candidate's performance. It is all about the candidate. Although it is important that the candidate speaks, what they say and how long they elaborate should not get out of the hand. So instead of exhibiting who's more powerful or knowledgeable, an effective interviewer retains effective control throughout. A pre-decided agenda for interview helps focus on information that the interview should reveal. Effective control helps the interviewer steer the conversation within the established time limit and meaningful direction of the exchange. Effective control should not come at the cost of continuity. Questions forming a logical flow help generate information in a cohesive manner. Bridging questions can be used to link two topics to maintain continuity. Note-taking helps retain the key points not only for later use but also during the interview so that some of the information could be probed further and continuity be maintained. Considering the general aims of the interviews and their types, interviews which are reasonably structured may have the following 5 parts. First is the welcome and introductory remarks and rapport building. This part is based on an understanding that how the interview is going to be administered has been chosen after due consideration. Second is informing the candidates about the organization and the job. This requires systematic job analysis, which leads to job descriptions and job specification as background preparation. Third is obtaining information about the candidate. This requires creating a list of interview questions and also creating benchmark answers based on the job specification. Fourth is answering the questions from the candidate. Fifth is closing the interview with an indication of the next step. If you think that most of the interviewing time should be spent on item number 3, you have got that right. We now move on to the errors that interviewers should avoid because they undermine the effectiveness of interviews. They include not clarifying the job requirement, not giving thought to candidate ordering, heavy leaning on first impressions, pressure to hire, falling for impression management, and judging the person based on a single characteristic. Except for unclarified job requirements and candidate ordering, all of the remaining errors stem from the perceptions of the interviewer, leading them to make unrealistic interpretation of the information that comes their way. The first two are related to the preparations ahead of the interviews. Not clarifying what the job entails and what sort of candidate is best suited for it lead to the interviewers collecting information that does not serve the purpose. Such interviewers end up making unsound decisions that may lead to selection of less fit candidate and not selecting a candidate who does have a better fit. As we have mentioned earlier at number 2 in the interview structure, the interviewer should clarify what sorts of traits they are looking for and why before starting to collect the information from the candidate. Inappropriate candidate ordering is an error in the interview preparation which has a high chance of leading the interviewer towards making erroneous judgment. The order in which the interviewers see applicants affects how they are going to be rated. An average candidate who appears after several below average candidates may receive more favorable rating than they would have objectively got. That is known as a contrast effect. When the interviewers are under the pressure to hire, they are likely to evaluate the candidates much more favorably than what they would have done objectively. The most consistent errors interviewers make is to jump to conclusions about the candidates based on their impressions formed within the first few minutes of the interview. In such cases, the interviewers make up their minds before the interview even begins. The first impressions are usually formed on the basis of candidates' applications and their personal appearance. Such impressions, when tending to lean on negative side, are even more serious. The interviewers are more influenced by unfavorable than favorable impressions about the candidate. Second, their impressions are much more likely to change from favorable to unfavorable than from unfavorable to favorable. If that is correct, then promising candidate with a good fit but not generating very favorable first impression in the first few minutes will not stand chance of actually being offered a job. Such a loss on both the sides. The applicant's non-verbal behavior such as smiling, avoiding eye contact, handshake, posture also have a large impact on the rating they get. These observations help interviewers judge the candidate's personality, particularly their level of extraversion and confidence. Clever candidates know and use this fact to their advantage. This tactic is a systematic manipulation of the interviewer's impression in favor of the candidate, known as impression management. Some candidates praise and agree with the opinions of the interviewers to get them to like them. Knowing that a perceived similarity in attitudes may influence the interviewer rating, some interviewees even fabricate such similarities. Unfortunately, physical attributes such as the applicant's attractiveness, gender, disability, or race also distort the assessments. When the individual candidate is judged on the basis of the class or category to which they belong, it is called stereotyping. Research has established that interviewers observe one favorable or unfavorable characteristic of the candidate and judge the person entirely on that basis. Attractive people are assumed to be smart, intelligent, and confident without looking for the evidence. This is called halo effect. If a candidate is assumed to be unsuitable on the basis of a single negative characteristic, it is called a Horn effect. In either case, there is no objective effort at collecting the necessary information about their KSA. With this, we come to the end of 9th session in the course HRM for non-HR managers. Today we discussed candidate interviews as perhaps the single most popular tool of employee selection. We discussed its aims and types, how a typical interview unfolds, and the errors that interviewers should avoid. We will see you soon for our next session. Until then, goodbye.